I agree with Mr. Friedman with respect to those agencies which have had the major purpose of economically propping up a certain industry, which is why consumer advocates like myself advocate the elimination of the ICC, the CAB, the Maritime Commission. But when you're talking about consumer protection in the marketplace, and when you're talking about government watchdogging competition, consumers need, and as every poll is showing, they're demanding more and more protection. And to give just two examples of how information is simply not enough to protect the consumer. 5 years ago, I could not have bought a child's crib in this country that would have had the slats sufficiently close together that I did not have to worry about the child strangling. Not until the government and the Consumer Product Safety Commission stepped in did consumers then have the choice to buy that type of a crib. Strangulation's down 50%. And in 1975, if I had wanted to lease a Xerox machine, I could not have done it. And not until the Federal Trade Commission Antitrust stepped in and forced competition into that marketplace did I have that choice. And in 1 year, the price went from $14,000 down to $5,000. Those are dollars back in our pocketbooks, to say nothing of minimized emotional trauma.
Well, before we ask Milton Friedman to come back on that, let's establish the viewpoint of our other participants and experts. Dr. Richard Landau, what's your reaction?
Well, I think the cost is certainly outrageously large, and the benefits are trivial, if any. I think that perhaps Milton overstates it slightly to make his point, but basically I would have to agree with it in the area that I know best, which is the regulation of new drug development.
And Joan Claybrook?
Well, in the auto safety field, we've saved about 55,000 lives and millions of injuries because of auto safety regulations since the mid-1960s. I might also comment that the cost of auto crashes each year to the American public is $48 billion a year. Fairly substantial when you compare it to other things, much less, again, the human trauma.
Bob Crandall.
Well, I think it's impossible to disagree with Milton Friedman on the effects of economic rate regulation of the sort that the railroads and the trucking industry have been through. The intent of that legislation was, of course, to protect the railroads and to protect the trucks, and the same thing is true for maritime regulation. What sustains regulation is sort of a populist theory that somehow, through government, we will redistribute wealth from people who own business firms to consumers. In fact, that doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in economic regulation, and there's very little evidence that it works that way in any kind of regulation. As to whether we get any value from health and safety regulation, I think much of it is too new to know.
Well, now that's where the area I want to start with, because remember that was the first part of his argument, the whole idea of consumer product safety action by the state. Now, is that so far working? Very close to your interest, I know. What's your reaction, Kathleen O'Reilly?
Well, on product safety, in the state of that, the lawnmower industry had said for 20 years they could not design a safe lawnmower. Only when the Consumer Product Safety Commission forced them with the new standard, suddenly their creative genius was overnight. They came up with net whips that were made out of plastic, and they came up with very innovative forces, which is why that government presence actually triggered innovation that otherwise would have been left uncovered.
It's very easy to see the good results. The bad results, it's very much harder to see. You haven't mentioned the products that aren't there because the extra costs imposed by Consumer Product Safety Commission have prevented them from existing. You haven't mentioned the case of the tris problem on the flammable garments. Here you had a clear case where a regulation of the CPSC essentially had the effect of requiring all manufacturers of children's sleepwear to impregnate them with tris.
Oh, but that's not
3 years, 5 years later, the regulation required the garments to be non-flammable, and as it happened, tris was the most readily available chemical which could do it.
Kathleen O'Reilly?
That's absolutely not true.
But let me finish the story first, because the second half of the story is the important part of it. It turned out that tris was a carcinogen. And 5 years later, or 3 years later, I'm not sure the exact time, the same agency had to prohibit the use of those sleepwear garments, forced them to be disposed of at great cost to everybody concerned.
All right, let's look at the real interesting history here. In 1968, when Congress passed the Flammable Fabric Act, they did not tell the CPSC what chemicals would comply with that and what would not. And so initially when industry said, we're going to use TRIS, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, from their initial test, we're disturbed by it and had announced informally to industry that they were not going to allow TRIS to be used. Industry balked and said, we're going to take you to court because the Act only says it has to be flame retardant. You, the government, cannot tell us how to comply. And it was the industry that forced the hand of CPSC away, and they don't even deny that.
I'm not trying to defend the industry. Go slowly. I am not pro-industry. I am pro-consumer, unlike you. I'm not pro-industry, and of course industry will do a lot of bad things. The whole question at issue is what mechanism is more effective in protecting the interests of the consumers, the dispersed, widespread forces of the market. Take the case of the flammable fabrics. Suppose you had not had the requirement.
You believe that it was right to test them, don't you? For a government agency to test them?
No, not at all.
No.
There are private consumer testing agencies. There's the Consumers Research. There's Consumers Union. You speak about a widespread demand for more protection. Those agencies have those organizations.
They have all these publications on cars. So what they do is they test the brakes and steering. They never crash test them. And the most important thing to know about a car when you buy it is if the car crashes, are you going to be killed unnecessarily? So you can't even get that information.
But the reason they don't test them,
it's too expensive. That's the reason why.
Of course, and why is it too expensive for them? Because the number of consumers who are willing to buy their Surface and take it is very, very small.
That is not why. The reason why is because it's enormously expensive.
Of course, but if they had a large enough number of customers, if there were enough customers, enough consumers...
Yes, but that's a chicken and egg situation, which is ridiculous.
It's not a chicken and egg situation.
If you believe that technological information is important for consumers to have, which is the basis and the thesis of your argument, surely that you would say that one of the things that society does is it groups together to provide basic services to the public. Police, traffic services, all sorts of basic kinds of things, the mail service and the fire service and all the rest of it. Why is it that they shouldn't even do testing of technological subjects which the public have no way of knowing?
Before you reply, I want one or two others in on this.
It seems to me that Professor Friedman could give a little bit on this ground. Certainly in the dissemination of information there's a free rider problem. And one of the problems is that while you and I might value the results from a consumer union rather highly, we don't have to pay for it. We can look over the shoulder of someone else, borrow the magazine from the library, and so forth. I wouldn't go so far as to say that the government should not at all be in the business of generating information, though I am concerned about exactly the same forces, this evil industry that Ms. O'Reilly talks about, having its influence on how this information is prepared. I don't see how we guard ourselves against that. But it seems to me that there is a case to be made that the market does not supply enough information.
It may not, but the market supplies a great deal, and there's also a free rider problem in the negative sense on government provision of information, because people who have no use for that information are required to pay for it.
No, I don't quite understand your position on this. Are you saying, though, that there's no place for government to test consumer product safety at all?
I am saying, let's separate issues. I am saying there is no place for government to prohibit consumers from buying products the effect of which will be to harm themselves. There is, of course, a place... Well, for a moment, I'm trying to separate the issues. There is a place for government to protect third parties. If we go to your automobile place case.
What about children? Children aren't choosers,
no.
Right? They don't make choices.
Parents make their choices. But let's go...
Where has it? There's no choice.
We can only take one issue at a time. We're a little difficult to take them all at once. Let's take one at a time. I say there is no place for government to require me to do something to protect myself. Now, if government has information,
has or obtained?
For a moment, suppose it has information, then it should make that public and available. The next question is, are there circumstances under which it's appropriate for government to collect information? There may be some such circumstances. They have to be considered one at a time. Sometimes there is and sometimes there isn't. But you see, I want to get back. Take your area, Ms. Claybrook. You are now involved on an airbag problem.
That's right.
If I understand the situation, I don't know anything about the technical aspects of it, but the airbag in a car is there to protect me as a driver. It doesn't prevent me from having an accident hurting somebody else because it's only activated by an accident. Right now, why shouldn't I make that decision? Who are you to tell me that I have to spend whatever it is, $200, $300, $400, on that airbag?
Well, we don't tell you that. What we say is that when a car crashes into a brick wall at 30 miles an hour, the front seat occupants have to have automatic protection built into the car. And it's a very,
Why have
it's
to?
a very minimal.
Why have to? I don't care whether it's an airbag or a seatbelt.
Well, there are two reasons why. One is that the sanctity of life is a fairly precious entity in this country.
It's more precious to me than it is to you. My life is more precious to me than to you.
Well, you know.
Do you wear your seatbelt?